A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thank you so much for tuning into another edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. It is great to have you with us once again. We've got a very special guest coming up here in just a couple of minutes. You know, I was out at the Second Amendment rally in Washington, D.C. over the weekend. I want to thank everybody who showed up there. There were thousands of folks in attendance from all around the country, as far away as Hawaii, as far north as, I think, New Hampshire, Washington State, I know was represented. It was great to meet so many folks who have been longtime listeners or viewers to Cam and Company, as well as some folks who've discovered the program since we launched Bearing Arms Cam and Company just a few months ago. And there was an incredible lineup of speakers. I got to tell you, I mean, there was so much ideological diversity. There was so much political diversity. There was, any way you want to slice and dice gun owners around the country. What you'll find is that we make up, every portion of American life. And I think that was on display at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. on Saturday afternoon. It was just it was a great afternoon. Weather was perfect. There were several 100,000 Washington Nationals fans who were just a couple of blocks away because the team, who could have predicted that the Washington Nationals was going to win the World Series, that they would have their victory parade that would end up just a couple of blocks from where we were. But I got to tell you, I was a little concerned about traffic. I got up bright and early Saturday morning, drove in, had no issues, parked a few blocks away, and it was great. And I had a chance to see some old friends like Maj Toure. Election day in Philadelphia, by the way, is coming up tomorrow. Maj is running for city council. Argo J, Tim Knight. Obviously, Rob Pincus, who's been on the program before, had an opportunity to meet some folks that I've never had a chance to meet before, like Joshua Prince, firearms attorney up in Pennsylvania, who will hopefully be a guest here before long on Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Gabby Franco gave an impassioned speech, native of Venezuela, now a U.S. citizen, talking about the heartbreak. And the heartbreak was so evident on her face and in her voice. The heartbreak of watching what has happened to the land where she grew up, the land that she represented as an Olympic shooter, and how the gun control efforts, first of Nicolas Maduro, first of Hugo Chavez and now of Nicolas Maduro, have eviscerated the ability of Venezuelans to be able to protect themselves. But one individual who spoke, I think, was a big surprise. Dan Gross is the former head of the Brady Campaign to prevent gun violence. And he was speaking at a Second Amendment rally in Washington, D.C. over the weekend. It was a big moment for Dan, who talked about the frustration that he felt when he was running the Brady Campaign, trying to move the organization away from gun legislation into things like best practices for gun owners. It was really interesting, and I had the opportunity to speak with Dan on Friday before the rally even took place to talk about how he actually went from being the head of a gun control group to speaking at a Second Amendment rally. And here's what he had to say. Take a look and a listen. Well, Dan, thank you so much, sir, for coming on the program. It is good talking with you today.
Likewise, Cam. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So as you and I are talking, we're getting ready for the Second Amendment rally in Washington, D.C., and I imagine that by the time this airs, there are going to be a lot of folks who are wondering what a former head of the Brady campaign was doing at a Second Amendment rally in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully they won't be wondering once they've seen me there and heard what I have to say and realized the tremendous common ground that we all stand on, and realize that it's how consistent it is with everything, or with a large part of everything that I said when I was at Brady. And listen, my desire to be at this rally is not to talk about a few small areas where we may still disagree, but it's to focus on the huge areas where we agree, because that's the biggest opportunity to accomplish what I know we all agree on, which is to prevent the innocent loss of life and to prevent tragedies from happening.
And so where do you think those areas of agreement are, Dan?
I think the biggest area, start out with the fact that it has nothing to do with government involvement, has nothing to do with laws. It has to do with the responsibilities that come along with the unquestionable rights that gun owners have to own guns. And I think if we all could just acknowledge that with that unquestionable fundamental right comes very serious responsibilities with owning a gun, we can actually do as much as anything else to prevent tragedies from happening and to prevent the loss of innocent life.
Is that where you think this conversation sort of gets derailed? That there are, you look at a Robert Francis Beto O'Rourke, and he's out there. Hell yes, we're taking their AR-15s. There is, I think, a mindset among some Americans of the Second Amendment is old, it's outdated, it needs to go away. There really is no right to keep and bear arms. Let's not treat it like it's a right. Does that? And when that happens, I think, gun owners like myself, we sort of get our backs up. And then you're right. We end up talking about, no, it is a right. It is a right, as opposed to talking about the responsibilities that come with being a gun owner.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said 100% defines where our common ground is, 100% defines why it hopefully won't seem surprising that I'm speaking at this rally on Saturday, or by the time this airs, will have spoken at this rally on Saturday. And yeah, I think conversations, for example, about an assault weapon ban are not productive conversations. I think any conversation about policy should be a mutually respectful one about respecting the right to bear arms. And I think they should be focused on, rather than taking certain guns away from all people, how do we keep all guns away from certain people, and those people being the people that we all agree shouldn't have them. But I want to emphasize that, my involvement with this rally is not even to talk about that, because I think just the policy conversation by itself can be distracting from the responsibility that gun owners have when they bring a gun in their home to own it safely. And I think for too long, those conversations, I'm not saying they're not both very important, but the conversation around policy is distracted from the conversation about the responsibilities that gun owners have to take.
So how did you get involved in this rally? How did this all happen?
So for a little more than a year now, I've been building a relationship and friendship with Rob Pincus, who the viewers of your program are probably familiar with. And we realized, I wound up actually taking one of his advanced training courses. I think, to my surprise, he invited me, and to his surprise, I accepted. We did it in Worcester, Mass. It was a crappy day out, and it was raining, and I'm sure that Rob thought I was going to flake at any possible moment, even during the day, but I got a lot out of it. And, my mission all along has been really to understand the mindset of people who own guns, so I could continue on this path of really, respecting where they come from. And I thought at the very least it was going to be an important part of that. But it wound up being a lot more. We wound up, after the training course, we wound up said, hey, let's grab a drink in the hotel bar of this little hotel we were staying at in Worcester, Mass. And we wound up talking until 2 or 3 in the morning. And we wound up realizing how much we all agree, or how much he and I agree about the things that I just said. And it was apparent to me in the training course. He said, in the beginning, and I could never, again, those of you who know Rob will attest to this, never do it as eloquently or compellingly as he could. But in the beginning, he talked to everybody. He said, listen, let's be honest with ourselves. If you bring a gun into your home, if you're carrying a gun on the street, it's more likely that somebody will get shot and will get killed. That's not to say that, it's not our right to do it. It's not to confuse it with that conversation at all. It's just a fact. Just like if you get behind the wheel of a car, something that you're more likely to get in a car accident than if you walked. Just kind of the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
And I think starting from that perspective, that, it's with the unquestionable right of owning a gun comes the unquestionable responsibility to do it safely. I think that defined what to us represented a really exciting common ground. So we're actually on Saturday, I by the time this airs, I will have announced that we're starting a project called the Center for Gun Rights and Responsibility to really help gun owners in this country reclaim the narrative that I've believed all along, that this is a responsible, law-abiding group of people who believe in a fundamental right, but are also willing to claim responsibility for the risks associated with it.
And it's interesting because, as Rob put it, I think that's absolutely correct. But it's just that it's how you respond to that fact, right? So there are some folks who hear, well, yeah, okay, well, if you're more likely to, shoot somebody, or there's more likely to be an accidental shooting if you have a gun as opposed to if you don't. Well, let's just get rid of all the guns then, and that goes away. Why is that not something that you agree with, Dan? Why did you not adopt that prohibitionist model when it comes to gun control?
There are two reasons, that both equally important. One is, and both on their own would be enough to have made me adopt that frame. One is the Second Amendment. There is a right in this country to own guns. I never set out to question that right. But then the other reason is, I started in advertising. I came to the quote gun issue after my brother was shot in a shooting on top of the Empire State Building, a mass shooting. And at the time, I was a partner at a big ad agency, and I came to the issue with kind of an advertising perspective. And the key to advertising is really not faking it, really trying to understand where the people that you want to communicate with, whether whether you agree with them or not, where they're coming from. Mm-hmm. And so that was always my mentality from the moment that I started on my journey on this issue. And I very quickly came to appreciate, because you don't have to listen hard to realize what I said before, which is, people who own guns are human beings, and it's the same percentage of people who own guns are good people, good parents, good citizens as the percentage of people who don't. And I think if you start out from that perspective and you start out with that kind of respect for people who own guns, it leads you very naturally to a place where, like, it's off the table, the conversation about banning guns for both of the reasons that I said, the Second Amendment and a respect for where people who own guns are coming from. I also, I don't disagree that there are instances where you can use a gun to protect yourself. And I realize that people who buy guns do it for either some sort of very meaningful benefit to them in terms of something they enjoy doing, or for the really noble and good intent that I do not question, that I've seen a lot of people from my side question, to protect themselves. So, like, why would I challenge that?
Yeah. Well, listen, unfortunately, you got to get to the airport, but I would love to continue this conversation. Will you come back at some point? Because I've got a lot more questions, and I do appreciate your time today.
No, I'd love to, Cam.
Again, I think it was really courageous of Dan to actually get up in front of that crowd of people who probably disagree with him on some policies, certainly might, harbor some ill will for him running a gun control organization. But one of the things that he talked about, and one of the common themes really of this rally, was in order to protect our Second Amendment, we're going to have to work together, even with people that we don't always agree with. If we're only willing to work with the people that we agree with 100% of the time, we're going to end up with 0% of our rights. If you can find a way to work with somebody that you agree with 90% of the time on the 90% of the things that you agree with, That's what we need. And we can disagree on that 10% or that 20% or on that 30%. But we have to be as strong as possible right now. We have to be as broad-based as possible right now. And we need to be finding ways and looking for ways to work together. There was a big join or die flag that somebody had at the rally over the weekend. And that's kind of the moment that our Second Amendment rights face right now. We either join together or the right dies. It disappears. One of the biggest proponents for infringing on our right to keep and bear arms is no longer a presidential candidate. Beto O'Rourke dropping out on Friday afternoon. Politico has the story of the waning days of the O'Rourke campaign and what went wrong. And I know that for gun owners, it's a reassuring thought. Beto O'Rourke proposed this sweeping gun ban, this compensated confiscation scheme, and he still got 2% of the polls. See, it's unpopular. Not really, not among the Democrat base that Beto was pursuing. I think the problem for Beto is actually that he didn't, if he's going to base it, or if he was going to base his campaign around gun control, he didn't go far enough. I mean, we forget, but Beto O'Rourke was not the first candidate to propose a mandatory compensated confiscation scheme. That came from Eric Swalwell, who also ended up dropping out not long afterwards. And then there was Beto. Cory Booker also backs the idea. As according to one poll that I've seen, 86% of Democrat voters also back the idea of a quote-unquote assault weapons ban and a mandatory quote-unquote buyback. So I don't think it was that Robert Francis Beto O'Rourke went too far for the Democrat base. I think it's that he didn't go far enough. Even as outspokenly anti-gun as he was not really all that different from any other candidate on a debate stage when it came to the issue of gun control. Every one of these candidates is out there promoting things like gun licensing, gun registration. Each and every one of them supports banning the sale of the most commonly sold rifle in America today. This is as anti-gun a crop of candidates as this country has ever seen. And if Beto wanted to be, thought of as the gun control candidate, he needed to do something rather than steal Eric Swalwell's idea. I had, half seriously suggested that Beto O'Rourke come out and call for a full repeal of the Second Amendment. I think that probably would have made him stand out. I don't know if it would have helped his electoral chances at all, but it would have actually differentiated himself from the candidates in that regard. And now that Beto O'Rourke is no longer a candidate, guess what? We still have the most anti-gun crop of the most anti-gun crop of candidates that have ever run for president. Doesn't matter that Robert Francis O'Rourke is no longer one of them, because each and every one of them that remains is as hostile to your right to keep and bear arms as he was. All right, let's get to today's armed citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our look at the criminal justice system. Today, I think we'll call it a matter of time. So it's November, and that means that your local television stations are doing special programming for sweeps. This is where they try to lure you in via these, something in your kitchen can kill you. Find out what tonight at 11, right? Those types of stories. They really ramp those up in November and May because that's when they set the advertising rates. Based on how many people are watching in November and May, they then go to the advertiser to say, okay, this is what you have to pay for a commercial. So everybody really tries hard to bring in the eyeballs in November. In Nashville, Tennessee, Channel 5 is running a special. I believe this is KSVM, I think is the call letters. But it's News Channel 5. They are running a special during sweeps on the juvenile justice system in the state of Tennessee, calling it broken, outdated, and in catastrophic failure. They are specifically highlighting a rise in homicides and in robberies involving juveniles in the Nashville area. This is obviously a Nashville-based TV station, so that's where they're looking. They talked with a police lieutenant there with the Nashville Metro Police Department, Blaine Whited, and he talks about how, he says, quote, "Why are we still experiencing the same youth committing violent offenses and car thefts and over again?" He says, from our experiences, these juveniles a lot of times even think, they do not even a lot of times think that there were any consequences because they are released so fast. They don't correlate that there was any consequence for them being arrested for the stolen car or the gun. So News Channel 5 looked at juvenile crime data going back 8 years. They say of the 35 juveniles charged with homicide in Nashville since 2016, almost 66% of them had previous criminal records that they say should have set off alarms. They asked one judge, when a child commits a murder and that child's been in and out of the system, do you say we failed that child? And the judge says, when a child's committed murder or has been alleged to commit murder and they've been in and out of the system, I definitely believe that we as a system and as a community have failed that child. Deborah Anna Begley, a recent homicide victim in Nashville. 2 juveniles charged with her death. One of them, 16-year-old Jamarius Hill. News Channel 5 in Nashville reports he was first arrested for theft of merchandise at age 12. Okay. Shoplifting, not the best thing, but a nonviolent offense. By age 14, handgun possession and evading arrest. 15, carjacking, aggravated robbery, auto theft, handgun possession, and he received what's called intensive probation. Within 6 months, he was arrested twice more. 6 months after that last arrest, Debrianna Begley was murdered. So you can say, again, you don't necessarily need to lock somebody up in juvie hall because they got arrested for shoplifting. Maybe even possession of a handgun. But when those crimes are then followed by escalating crimes, including violent crimes, at some point, and again, at some point pretty early, the juvenile justice system, which is supposed to rehabilitate these young offenders, at least that's the primary goal, needs to recognize that their rehabilitative efforts are not going to be working while this individual is out and about on probation. Right? So if you're in the Nashville area, I would encourage you to watch this entire series. And, honestly, if you work in local television, maybe you should think about a similar series the next time sweeps roll around, because sadly, this story out of Nashville and the story out of Tennessee in the juvenile justice system, this is not an anomaly. This is how the juvenile justice system works, or doesn't. All right, on to our armed citizen of the day from Lithia, Florida, where a pregnant woman, 8 months pregnant, ends up saving the life of her husband, her daughter, and herself after a violent home invasion. Here is the woman's husband who spoke with Spectrum News 9 in Florida about this. He says doesn't know those individuals, says complete strangers to him. Now, law enforcement believes that this was not a random attack, but it was last week, about 9 o'clock one night, when these 2 masked armed intruders broke into this home, began beating the husband and father in his face. Jeremy King said he had a fractured eye socket, a fractured sinus cavity, a concussion, 20 stitches, 3 staples in his head. He says that they grabbed his 11-year-old daughter. He said, I'm telling them I have nothing for you. And they're like, give me everything you got. He said it became real violent real fast. His wife was in a back bedroom, and she heard what was going on, and she poked her head out, and one of the 2 intruders shot at her. So she ducked back in the bedroom, she grabbed the AR, and she returned fire, hitting one of the suspects. He took off, made it about 200 yards out of the house, and then collapsed. The second suspect kept running. Police don't know who he is at this point. They've got no clues as to his identity. But Jeremy King said, these guys came in with 2 normal pistols and my AR stopped it. He said, my wife even the playing field and kept them from killing me. How about that? So why do you need an AR? Well, first of all, it's not about need now, is it? But secondly, you might need an AR in case more than one individual breaks into your home seeking to kill you and your family. Right? All right. Let's get to our good deed of the day. New York State Police reporting on this story after a New York police sergeant came to the aid of an individual in a burning home. Sergeant Robert Bloom III was actually on his way to a police academy graduation. He was in his kilt, and then he saw smoke as he was on his way there. So he made a little detour, pulled in, eventually identified that there was a individual who was bedridden in the home, and Sergeant Bloom, with the help of two good Samaritans in the area, ended up saving that gentleman trapped inside the burning home. Sergeant Bloom taken to local hospital, treated for smoke inhalation, but is expected to recover. He's going to be okay. In the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. We thank you, sir, for your very, very good deed. And that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program as well. Don't forget, you can subscribe to the show as a podcast at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, townhall.com podcasts as well. You can also subscribe to Town Hall Media at YouTube, and that way you will never miss a program. We'll be back tomorrow with the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation. Thanks again for watching, for listening, and for spreading the word about Bearing Arms Cam & Company.